Hey, everybody. Dr. Sean Talbot here. I want to talk to you about something that I get asked all the time. I get this question not every day, but definitely every week. Somebody asks me some question about sweeteners, natural sweeteners, non-nutritive natural sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, fruit acids, things like citric acid and things like that. So I want to unpack some of that on this little video. So I'm not an anti-sugar person. In fact, I think sometimes sugar can be a good thing. So I've formulated lots and lots of products for lots and lots of companies, and sometimes I'll put sugar in an energy drink. If it's an athletic energy drink where you're trying to get some endurance out of it, like a Gatorade style kind of a thing, or an actual carbohydrate source. So if you're on the bike or you're on a long run or something like that, it makes perfect sense that you're going to have different kinds of sugars. You're going to have some glucose and some fructose and maybe some maltodextrin, and make advantage of all the different glucose or carbohydrate transporters in the gut, so you can get more carbohydrates on board, so you can use that for energy. But it also makes sense to use a little bit of sugar when you're trying to hydrate somebody. So there's a lot of these low carb or no carb hydration products on the market, and they're just not as effective as the ones that use a little bit of sugar. So here's an example of the dose makes the poison. You don't want a huge amount of sugar. If you have the amount of sugar that's in a soda, like 30 or 40 or 50 grams that you might see in a Coca-Cola or a Mountain Dew or something like that, that's actually going to slow water absorption. So it's going to impede your hydration. But if you have a little bit of sugar, like 5 grams is sort of the level that I like to use, that can enhance your hydration. And so I like that for a hydration beverage. I like that for an energy beverage, because a lot of times in the afternoon, when you're getting that little dip in energy levels around 3 o'clock, it's because you're dehydrated, and that dehydration is being perceived by the body as fatigue. And a lot of times you'll sense that. You'll go get a candy bar or something like that because you think you're hungry or you think you need some sugar. And what you really need is to stay hydrated, and a tiny little amount of sugar, like a 5-gram dose. That's about the amount that you're going to see in a sugar packet. One of those little sugar packets that you see on the counter at the diner. It's a small amount of sugar. It's really insignificant in terms of your overall calorie intake or your blood sugar control or something like that. So that's where sugar can be beneficial. I actually don't use a lot of sugar in my life. If I'm going to sweeten something, like if I'm going to sweeten a cup of coffee, I'll very often use some maple syrup or some honey or something like that. Here at the bed and breakfast that we run, 3 Waves Wellness Bed and Breakfast, we give honey for our guests. We give maple syrup. Sometimes, if people want it, we give agave nectar. It's not my favorite. I don't particularly like the flavor of it, but some people do. These are all sources that are somewhat better than just plain cane sugar. We give them cane sugar if they want that too. But it's something that you use a small amount here and there, like a little spoonful of it in your coffee isn't gonna be a big deal. Sugar is very much a dose is the poison sort of a thing. But we don't want to be getting a lot of it. If you switch over to a honey or a maple syrup or an agave nectar, you're going to get a little bit of other stuff, right? There might be some minute levels of vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and things like that, but it's really not that much of a meaningful thing. It's really more of a flavor issue. So I choose maple syrup, in my oatmeal. I choose honey in my coffee and my tea. But different strokes for different folks. What we don't want to do, though, is have a lot of sugar. And there's lots of people out there who are trying to reduce their sugar intake, which I applaud. I think lots and lots of people should do that. And you might be looking at the pros and cons of a sugar-free beverage or a sugar-free kind of a food. So we definitely know one thing. There's going to be a lot to unpack here. We definitely know that the artificial sweeteners are no good. You don't want them, not necessarily because they're going to hurt your body, but because they're going to hurt your microbiome. They're going to hurt the bacteria in your gut, and that's going to hurt your body. So we do know that artificial sweeteners like sucralose and saccharin and that whole family of artificial sweeteners is definitely not a good thing for the microbiome. And one of the reasons for it is that those bacteria don't know what to do with it. And it ends up being a source of sweetness that they can't use as a fuel source. And, in a sense, it sort of starves them. But that sweetness, you're going to sense it on your tongue. You're going to sense it in the receptors in your gut. And that sweetness is going to send a signal to your brain that says, we just got sweetness, but we didn't get any calories. And what it ends up doing over the long term is it interferes with your body's ability to sense energy, and it changes your appetite levels. So let's say you get 100 calories of sweetness, or what your body thinks is sweet enough to be 100 calories. If those energy calories aren't there, your body will upregulate its appetite to consume those 100 calories later on. So if you have a Diet Coke, and you think that you're saving those 100 calories instead of having a regular Coke, you're not really, because you won't have them now, but your body is going to force you to get them later so that the ledger is on balance, right? You don't want to have this we think we got 100 calories, but we can't account for it somewhere, so let's make sure that we get it. So, you end up eating those diet foods, those artificially sweetened foods, and you go, you think you reduce the calorie intake, but you end up making up for it later on. And there's good studies that show this, behavioral studies that show that you end up upregulating your appetite later on in the day, or the next day, and you end up being sort of a wash. So why don't you just have a little bit of the sugar, like I mentioned before? Don't go drink a Coke, right? We just don't want to have that big dose of sugar. So this is another reason that people are looking for what are called non-nutritive sweeteners. So these are things that give sweetness, but they don't give calories, but they're also not synthetic. They're natural. So they're not sucralose and saccharin and those sorts of things. They are things like stevia or xylitol or erythritol, which are both sugar alcohols. Or there's one called katemfe, which comes from a little South African fruit or South American fruit. There's a little fruit, monk fruit, that comes from China. These are all things that have sweetness, but either low calories or no calories. So it allows you to have sweetness without the calories of sugar. It allows you to have sweetness without the downside of the artificial sweeteners. And people will sometimes ask me, well, why are those any better than the artificial sweeteners? And the reason for it is because they're naturally derived. I mentioned you have taste receptors in your tongue, right? That's what tastes sweet. You also have receptors in your gut. You have sweetness receptors and bitter receptors. The thing about these natural sweeteners is that you get both sweetness and bitter, and that's what you want. It's one of the reasons that I really like stevia as a sweetening agent. Stevia comes from a leaf. There's a plant called stevia. You can take those leaves, and if you eat one of the leaves, you'll notice a little bit of sweetness. You'll also notice it has a very bitter aftertaste. You can process that leaf, and you can make it a purified version of the sweetness components, which in stevia are this whole family of things called riboticides. There's Reb A, B, C, D. The Reb A is the one that has the most sweetness out of stevia. And so you'll get extracts that are really, really concentrated in Reb A, and you get something that's very, very sweet and not very bitter in terms of an aftertaste. I actually don't prefer to formulate with those. I like to use a stevia that's a little more balanced, that has a little less of the sweetness, the Reb A, and a little more of the bitterness. And the reason for that is because it helps to make sure that energy ledger in your body is on balance. So you taste a little bit of sweetness here on your tongue, so that's good for your product experience, right, of tasting that food. But you also get a bitter sensation in your gut, and that sends a signal of health through the body. I won't go into it now on this video, but there's this whole area of research where we can use bitter compounds from plants to help with gut metabolism, to help with energy metabolism, to help with blood sugar control. So those bitterness components, which are actually phytonutrients that are naturally occurring in the plant, are actually very beneficial things. So in a stevia leaf extract, what I like to do is use one that is a balanced extract. It gives a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of bitterness, and that is going to be better for the overall experience. Sometimes when we're formulating products, we'll use one form of stevia in this product and a different form of stevia in that other product based on what the other ingredients are. One of the downsides, I guess, of using stevia is that sometimes it can make bitter compounds more bitter. Sometimes it can make organic compounds taste more organic. Sometimes it can interfere with something else I'm going to talk about, which is the use of fruit flavors and acids and things like that. So you really have to play around a little bit with what extracts that you're using. But stevia is sort of my go-to when somebody is looking for a non-nutritive sweetener, meaning no calories but sweet, but a natural one. Stevia is always my first choice. But some people really don't like stevia. Some people really, really get a strong, bitter aftertaste, and it just ruins the whole experience because they get a sweetness when they eat the product or they drink the product, but then boom, a few seconds later they get this really strong, bitter aftertaste, and it's just they just can't tolerate it. So if that's something that you don't like, then you can use something like a xylitol or an erythritol. These are sugar alcohols. So xylitol we can extract it from birch trees. It's naturally occurring in a lot of different fruits and vegetables, mostly fruits. We can extract it from birch trees. We can get it from most commercial sources actually come from corn cobs because that's a source of the carbohydrate that is used. What they're looking for is cellulose, which you can get from any plant, but there's millions and probably billions of corn cobs out there that aren't being used for anything. So it's a readily available and cheap source. You get the cellulose, you convert that into something called xylose, which is a simple sugar, and then you stitch those all together and you make xylitol, and that's what gives you this sweetness. Erythritol is the other one, and the glucose, the sugar source for that, can come from cornstarch, it can come from wheat, but that's usually a fermentation process where you give that glucose to a yeast cell, and the yeast then will make this sugar alcohol. So sugar alcohols can also be great. You'll see them in chewing gum. You'll see them in energy bars. You'll see them in vitamins, like chewables. You'll see them in gummies. You'll see them all over the place. This also is an example of the dose makes the poison. So small amounts of these sugar alcohols will actually be prebiotic to the gut, meaning your gut bacteria can use them a little bit, and they can metabolize them, and they can ferment them, and they can use them as an energy source and a fuel source. But the problem comes when you start getting too many of these sugar alcohols, because once they get down into the gut, a big volume of them will draw water into the gastrointestinal tract, and that will lead to bloating and flatulence and nausea and a whole bunch of bad gut experiences that you don't really want. And that's where I see these products are being used more and more and more. The reason the companies like to use them is that you can put a whole bunch of these sugar alcohols in, xylitol, erythritol, sorbitol even, and you get a sweetness, but you don't carry that carbohydrate on your label. So it looks like a low-carb food, even though it has a lot of these sugar alcohols. And if you're using a couple 100 milligrams or a gram, even 1,000 milligrams, so you get a sweetness effect, that's going to be perfectly appropriate for your gut and for your microbiome. But if you start using 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 grams that we start seeing in some of these low-carb products, low-carb energy bars, low-carb, paleo kinds of shakes and things like that, then you're getting a huge dose, which can cause those gastrointestinal problems. What we're learning over the last year or two is that those high levels of sugar alcohols can also lead to potential cardiovascular problems. They seem to, at those very high doses, they seem to change the way your platelets, your blood clotting factors function, and they can actually make your blood more likely to clot. So you can think of it making your blood thicker or making your blood more sticky, and that is definitely not a good thing. So, use them judiciously. If you want to have them in a little bit of a product like a gummy or a chewing gum or, a chewable vitamin or something like that, that's okay, but really steer clear of them when they're used in those low carb products at a high level. Some of the other ones that you might see from time to time, I mentioned them just a minute ago. There's a fruit called katemfe that comes from South America. It has a little compound in it, a little peptide, so like a little short protein chain called thaumatin, and the thaumatin is about 2,000, 3,000 times sweeter than sugar. So you can use a small amount of it and get a really strong sweetness effect. The problem with thaumatin is that because it's a little peptide, sometimes you can't use it in foods that have to be cooked. It's maybe not as stable as some of these other things like a stevia and a Reb A. Those riboticides I should have mentioned before. You can even extract them out of cane sugar. So you can take cane sugar, which normally would come along with calories, and you can extract out just the sweetness component, which in cane is called Reb M, and you can put just that in, and that tastes just like sugar. It's a little expensive, so you don't see it in a lot of products right now. But as it gets less expensive, as it gets more affordable, I think you'll see a combinations of a little bit of Reb A from stevia, a little bit of Reb M from cane sugar, maybe a little bit of xylitol, maybe a little bit of Katemfe in certain products, maybe a little bit of monk fruit. People ask me all the time, how come you don't use monk fruit in your formulas? And the problem is, monk fruit can be great. It has these compounds called mogrosides that are maybe 100, 200, 300 times sweeter than sugar. So they're good, but that sometimes isn't strong enough to get over the thing that you're trying to sweeten, right? So a lot of times we're trying to sweeten things that have vitamins or minerals or different herbs that taste really, really yucky, and monk fruit sometimes just isn't powerful enough, So very often what we end up doing with formula development is we'll use a combination of things, right? We might use some stevia if we want like a bright, sweetness, but then we have the bitter aftertaste that we have to figure out what we're going to do with. Sometimes you want something like xylitol, which acts really, really quickly, but goes away quickly in terms of the sweetness that it delivers. You could use something like thaumatin that comes on a little slower, but lasts a little longer. So sometimes what you'll see is these combinations of natural sweeteners that will be used, so you get an overall experience of biting into something that is like, if you want it to taste like a grape, or you want it to taste like an apple, or you want it to taste like, whatever you're trying to go for, sometimes you want to combine these different things so you get the right experience. Which leads me into my next part of my discussion, which is to get something to taste fruity or juicy or bright or, any of those things that we associate with, raspberries or fruit punch or something like that. We can't just only do sweetening, and we can't only do the fruit flavors, right? So let me talk about that before I talk about the acids. Natural sweeteners are one thing. Natural flavors are a whole nother thing, because natural flavors are usually, you can extract, vanilla from a vanilla bean. You can extract mango flavor from a mango fruit. You can extract raspberry flavor from a raspberry. You can extract, orange flavor from an orange. And that's where those natural flavors come from. But a lot of times what you end up have to do to make that natural flavor just right, you have to combine it with other ingredients. You might combine it with things that are debittering agents. You might combine them with things that are masking agents. So a lot of times on labels, all you're going to see is natural flavors. Don't be scared by that. If it says natural flavors, it's natural flavors. There's this myth on the internet that there's weirdo synthetic things that can be labeled as natural flavors. That's not true. If they're using natural, they'll say natural. If they're using artificial, they'll say artificial. If they're using a combination of those, they'll say natural and artificial. If you do it otherwise, you're breaking the law, and that's a whole nother discussion, I think. But natural flavors are what they are. You can ask the companies that provide the products to you what their natural flavors are, and they should tell you. Well, it's cocoa, or it's vanilla, or it's lime extract, or it's whatever. And there might be other ingredients there, like turmeric, for example, is sometimes used as an anti-bittering agent. You don't taste the turmeric, but they're putting it in there so that it tamps down the bitterness of a citrus extract, for example. Okay, so that's the natural flavor sort of a thing. Acids. I get asked a lot of questions about citric acid in particular. People, for some reason, think that it's bad for them. And there's no difference between the citric acid that you'll see in a in a fruit drink, and the citric acid that you're going to get from a citrus fruit. It's chemically, it's exactly the same compound. Where it comes from might be a little bit different. So the citric acid that we'll put in something that we want to taste, lemon lime, we can put in, lemon flavor, we can put in lime flavor, we can put in whatever sweeteners we're going to do, stevia or whatever else that I just talked about. But if we don't put in citric acid, it's not going to have the tartness that you associate with something being lemon lime. So you have to use that citric acid. We can extract it from lemons and limes, but where it very often comes from is from corn. You will use, like I kind of explained before, where does erythritol come from? Well, it might start as being cornstarch, which came from a corn plant. You make the cornstarch, use that cornstarch as a source of glucose. That glucose will be the source of energy for a yeast cell that will eat that glucose and spit out the thing that you're talking about. So, it could be spitting out the erythritol or the other thing. It can also be spitting out the citric acid, right? So, you can get it from a fermentation process, you can get it from a chemical process, but in the end, your body doesn't know the difference between the citric acid that you got from corn and the citric acid that you got from a lime. So you shouldn't be concerned about that. But we need those. We need citric acid to give that tartness. We need another acid called malic acid, which is typically found in apples. That can give a sour kind of a flavor. We can use, you've probably heard of acetic acid. This is vinegar. This is apple cider vinegar. This is a source of acetic acid, and that gives a different kind of acidic, tart, fresh sensation. If we're going to do something that we want to have like grape flavors, that's another acid called tartaric acid. So you really have to have a combination of the natural flavors, the natural sweeteners, the natural fruit acids, and when you put those all together, that's what gets something to taste like a berry flavor or a fruit punch flavor or a lemon lime berry flavor or whatever it is that you're going for. You have to have all of those things, but they can be used in very, very small amounts to give you the overall sensation and the enjoyment that you're looking for, so that you're not getting the sugar and you're not getting the calories and you're not getting the blood sugar problems, but you're doing it in a way that is gut friendly. And if we're doing things that are gut friendly, it's going to be body friendly and it's going to be mind friendly, and that's what we're really going for. So hopefully that helps you understand what we're doing here, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.